What if it were really that, he said, as though reaching a conclusion. Yes, that's what it was. I wanted to become a Napoleon. That is why I killed her. Do you understand now? Fyodor Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. This is the second part in a two-part series on Miiverse hacking, Miiverse hackers, bombing, and all their causes and effects. If you haven't watched the last video and don't know already, Miiverse was a social media site run by Nintendo from 2012 to 2017, which I and many others hacked to make multiple accounts with hacked posts. Though these were small events in a small place, we'll soon see that the varied aspects of this story can apply anywhere in the modern world. Today, I will not explain the aspects of the Miiverse platform or the hacking method in detail. That was done in the previous video. However, though I will bring up certain aspects of the site today to give these events a time and place, an understanding of its nitty-gritty mechanics will not be necessary to understand my main points. All you need to know is that the site had a large presence of children and heavy moderation governed by a toxic administration, that users could bomb Yaz to gain attention, the equivalent of likes on any other social media site, and that because of these aspects and many others, the site's culture suffered. If you're comfortable with this information, you should be able to follow this story, regardless of whether or not you've watched the first video in this series. In the last part, we discussed the basic issues with Miiverse's design, mechanics, and culture that created the openings for abuse. We saw how everything just seemed to click into place to provide opportunities for someone who wanted to hack the site. Miiverse's design laid the foundation for Miiverse hacking and bolstered its efficacy along the way. Its horrible design and culture provided motive to bypass certain restrictions, and these restrictions were so easy to bypass that anyone could do it. In fact, the method was public for a whole year when the site closed down in November 2017. But that doesn't show us the full picture of what happened, and it's not where the main focus is today. If there was so much motive, and it took so little effort, why didn't everyone hack Miiverse? The truth was that there were other trade-offs to hacking the site, and only people with a decidedly narcissistic outlook on these trade-offs, and an ability to see other hidden advantages in the method, could possibly think that hacking the site was a good idea. In this video, we are going to discover exactly who the person who hacked Miiverse was, viewing things through the lens of what they caused in our actions and lives on Miiverse and beyond. Now, I mentioned what the trade-offs to hacking were in the last video, and they should be known by most people who've used Miiverse, but here's a refresher. The hyperban is a ban to a Nintendo system which occurs after continued violation or abuse of some Nintendo policy, which in the case of Miiverse meant creating multiple hacked accounts with hacked posts. When a device is hyperbanned, it can no longer connect to networks at all, and it can't be undone. Your 3DS is essentially a brick as far as the internet is concerned. But there's another aspect too. Nintendo doesn't forget your mistakes. There are various ways Nintendo links accounts to different devices and other accounts, and when it's clear that some sort of foul play is afoot, any account that used to be linked to one of those accounts or devices might be punished as well. I found this out the hard way when my main account, which I thought I had protected by purging it from my 3DS before hacking, was banned after I got my 3DS hyperbanned. What makes this important is that due to the severity of these sacrifices inherent in the method, with crippled devices from hyperbans and high risk of losing other accounts, no one wanted to hack Miiverse. To most people, the benefits of protesting the issues of a tiny, broken little social media site in the corner of the web and gaining meager amounts of impersonal attention simply did not outweigh the risks of losing access to your online purchases on every device, never being able to play online with your account again, and needing to purchase a clean system in order to play games with a new account. It's true that Miiverse had a flawed design, and that its culture created an environment where hacking and spam might thrive, but to most people, Perspective brought the consequences into focus and revealed the minuscule advantages truly offered by Miiverse hacking in the long run. Even though everyone was exposed to the same issues on the platform, and after 2016 everyone had the ability to hack the site, not everyone did. Other factors were also at play, such as simple ignorance of the possibility to hack, but the vast majority of people experienced the issues of Miiverse, knew of the ability to hack, and had the ability to hack, but still decided not to because of the consequences. This meant that the factors that pushed Miiverse hackers over the edge had to do with personality traits that made us see the rewards and consequences of hacking the site in a very different way than 99% of those people. As I shift away from the issues of Miiverse, it's essential to note that I'm not ignoring those issues or saying they played no part in our decisions to hack the site. What I am saying, though, is that despite all we said at the time, they weren't ultimately the main reason. In the final analysis, there would have been no Miiverse hackers without specific characteristics that made the small number of us feel it was desirable, because to most people, it just wasn't. There were hidden advantages that Miiverse hackers saw in Miiverse hacking that only we did. I mentioned one of these in the conclusion of the last episode, and it's all about the power that Miiverse hacking supplied. With all the things it unlocked, Miiverse hacking offered the unique opportunity to have extremely enhanced powers over your fellow men. While the average person may not have seen this as particularly interesting, or maybe they would have thought searching for power on Miiverse.nintendo.net was ridiculous, this was very intriguing for someone more narcissistically inclined. We saw the power, we liked the power, and we wanted the power. Thus, we were intrigued by benefits that most other people weren't. But that's only one half of a whole. From the very beginning, I understood the consequences a hyperband would have for my 3DS and purchases, but I kept moving on. The hyperband wasn't a consequence at all in my mind, but the ultimate goal of my efforts. In my case, the truth was that I wanted to be hyperband, and that I valued what it meant more than any of its consequences. You see, only a handful of people have ever been hyperbanned due to Miiverse activity. The number's probably around 10, maybe a little bit more. This idea of being on a list of 10 people in the entire world enthralled me. It was more powerful than any desire for Miiverse justice, and was one of the main things that fueled me from the very beginning. It made me continue hacking, even after the novelty of the persona had passed. For in my mind, I thought there was something special about that designation. It made me unique, and I wanted to be unique. In previous formulations of my ideas, from a draft of this script from about 2 years ago, I always related this desire to be unique with Raskolnikov's desire in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I went off track with some aspects, trying to weave in the themes of crime and redemption didn't work so well, but that one connection with motive, I believe, is spot on. Beyond all frustrations with the platform, Miiverse hacking was a way to become unique, to fundamentally separate ourselves into a different class of people. I found in the hacks powers no one else possessed, and in the hyperband, a mark that I was extraordinary. Miiverse hacking, at its core, ultimately came out of a narcissistic desire to become a Napoleon, just as crime did with Raskolnikov. Although not every Miiverse hacker shared my desire to be hyperband, anyone who accepted that risk by hacking multiple accounts brought with them a similar chain of thought. Though everyone had various levels of commitment, we shared our core motives and let them take us in similarly destructive directions. And I think you too, dear listener, may soon see how these narcissistically destructive tendencies relate to your own life. In the end, though, this is a personal story. The motives I attribute to Miiverse hackers as a whole are ultimately what I see in myself. And not everything will fit the personal stories of everyone exactly. Regardless, in my case, the power was a benefit, and the hyperband was a benefit as well. everyone else had the platform-specific motives to hack the site, but only we saw these aspects in these ways. And for us, it truly was a win-win. This duality of the hidden benefits of power and the hyperban ultimately shows the motives for Miiverse hacking at their core. There are a lot of branches to unravel, but if you stick with me, you'll find that our motives all had to do with the narcissism expressed in these hidden benefits. I wanted to be great. I wanted people to know me. The true thing that made Miiverse hackers unique was not intelligence. After the scripts were released, anyone could have done what we did, but a completely narcissistic framework for Miiverse hacking's consequences and potential rewards. So, what kind of monsters did this narcissism create? Let's find out.
You ain't got a lot to kick it, my nigga. You ain't gotta try so hard.
Perhaps the most obvious place these aspects of our personality were revealed was with the Miiverse persona and the fundamental lies Miiverse made possible. As I mentioned in the last episode, Miiverse provided unique opportunities for people who wanted to lie about different aspects of themselves. But there wasn't any Miiverse-specific reason to want to do so. Instead, it was people with specific goals who utilized these opportunities to their advantage. I was a specific type of person who almost never behaved truthfully. I functioned constantly on the level of trying to project a narcissistically utilitarian image of myself into the world. Words and actions were used to elicit specific results, almost always to do with narcissistic goals. Yet, on Miiverse, these images didn't always have to work the same way in different circumstances, as I'll soon explain. Though my first Miiverse post was in the Super Mario 3D Land community, and I made several posts in other communities between then and the release of Super Mario Maker, my true Miiverse beginnings were in the Super Mario Maker community in early 2016. I created levels, shared them, received criticism for them, and gave criticism to others. Regardless of how many holes existed in its practical application, this model fit the stated goals of Miiverse pretty well. The Super Mario Maker community was, overall, a constructive place where gamers could talk about and play games together. Problems, when they did arise, tended to come from the actions of specific people, who were quickly identified and ignored, not from any overarching problem with design. This is not to say that the Super Mario Maker system was void of problems. It wasn't. Users gave stars when they liked a level, and the number of stars a maker received contributed to the number of levels they were allowed to upload and put them in rankings of different types. These rankings benefited precision platforming and mechanical levels more than others, stacking the odds slightly against people who wanted to create and find new traditional type levels. But this couldn't have seriously been considered motive for the various abuses of the system that were possible. While Miiverse hackers often claimed their actions were necessary to change the broken system or to protest against the broken system, in Super Mario Maker, such a claim was much harder to justify. The system was too well-rounded, and the abuses too clearly irrelevant and morally wrong for anything similar to land. Unlike Miiverse hacking, which was shrouded in all sorts of other contributing factors and false motives, mostly to do with how we were saving Miiverse, star exchanging and content robbing in Super Mario Maker were much more cut and dry. It was the person's problem, not the environment's. Thus, I believe the Super Mario Maker community can serve as a simplified lens through which the personal factors that resulted in Miiverse hacking can be viewed, made useful by the fact that it was where I actually began my Miiverse career. Although I had been making levels since late 2015, I was active in Super Mario Maker's Miiverse community from March 2016 until September 2016, with a brief revival in April and May 2017. My initial experiences with the community were extremely positive, and I quickly found myself in a group of people partaking in Mario Maker meetings, whose goals were to help people perfect the craft of enjoyable, well-designed levels, while giving them the chance to play and critique the levels of others. These people helped me improve my level design significantly, and I'll always appreciate the importance of this constructive criticism. The environment I was in was positive, constructive, and sufficiently challenging. Which makes the amount of level content I stole, the number of times I partook in star exchanges, as well as the overall way I conducted myself in the community as time went on, so much worse. If I wasn't fueled by narcissism, the story could have ended right there. I would have had a fun time enjoying a good game with friends. Unfortunately, I wasn't in it to have fun. I was in it to become popular. As it turns out, making good content is a contributing factor to popularity, a fact that may be able to speak for the advantages of the Super Mario Maker system. Yet, as with any avenue for success, good content wasn't the only contributing factor. And this is a problem. Since the enjoyment of the game itself wasn't my main goal, perfecting the craft and receiving honest thoughts from modest numbers of people whom I respected just wasn't good enough. To maximize attention and stars, there were specific chains of action that could be taken. There were specific ways to act and types of levels to be made to increase the likelihood of popularity. But most importantly, there were actual loopholes and abuses that could be exploited to achieve my goals. I ran multi-level play exchanges, stole pieces of music and pixel art from other makers several times, and engaged in multi-account star exchanges, an expedient practice deserving of some explanation. While in Super Mario Maker, you couldn't star a level made by any account on the same Wii U, there was no limit to how many accounts on the same system could star the same level, so long as that level was created by someone on a different Wii U. Thus, an agreement could be made between two people that one would star all the levels of the other with some number of accounts, as long as the other received the same number of stars. I performed 2 of these star exchanges with 2 users, whom I have enough respect for to keep unnamed. The first one involved 7 accounts, and the second involved 13. Unfortunately, neither of these multi-account star exchanges were ever paid back in full. While in other cases you might be able to call someone out publicly for failing to keep their end of a deal, in my case, with my goals, this was not an option. With a persona, there's no law that governs sketchy dealings. You see, I had a very important contradiction between action and speech to maintain. While all that happened behind the scenes, I wrote several discussion threads examining the morality of different things others and I were doing in the community, advocating for good conduct. After the official banning of star exchanges in the game in February or March of 2016, play exchanges became a popular alternative. But these were mostly just prettified star exchanges, because in most cases, the necessity of starring played levels was assumed by both parties, and those who were selective with their stars in an exchange were unlikely to receive many stars back. Multi-level play exchanges especially, where X number of your levels were played in exchange for you playing X number of someone else's, were governed by unspoken rules that essentially made them large star exchanges. Understanding this, I wrote a thread in July 2016 detailing the problems with play exchanges, especially the multi-leveled ones, and demanded change. My thread directly led to the broad end of play exchanges in the Mario Maker community, replaced with honestly much less functional feedback exchanges and clear exchanges. Regardless of the virtues of my critique, it's important to keep in mind that these posts were made after participating in around 40 of these play exchanges myself, with plans for another bona fide multi-star exchange shortly down the road. This contradiction came naturally from my basic motives. Though star exchanging, stealing level content, and multi-level play exchanging, though not exactly an abuse, were natural with the goal of gaining attention in mind, people who abused the system in this way weren't very likable. People much preferred makers who got their stars authentically, with hard work and good levels. Despite this, stealing content and exchanging stars remained a fast way to earn the maximum popularity with the least effort. The only way to receive the benefits of both being likable and abusing the system would be to use a persona. This is perhaps the most important point to understand. My persona was emergent from my goals. The fact that I inhabited a persona which attempted to be likable, working in tandem with expedient abuses of the system, points specifically to one goal in particular, namely that of gaining maximum popularity. If I only cared about enjoying the game, I would not have stolen content or exchanged stars, and I would not have had to lie. But if my goal was maximum popularity, I'd have to lie in a specific way in order to milk the maximum value from both expedient action and positive public image. This is exactly what I did. This is also seen in all politicians, actors, and writers whose goals lie not in the intrinsic enjoyment of their work. In other words, most of them. Their words aren't truthful because fulfilling their true goals in the most expedient way requires that their hidden actions contradict their public image. If they really wanted to serve the people instead of have maximum popularity, they would have no hidden actions and their public image would be truthful. When all you care about is status and popularity, which unfortunately is what the modern political system is all about, contradictory behaviors and actions that follow a very specific pattern are inevitable. In politics, and in the example of Super Mario Maker, the motives for this contradiction between words and behavior are obvious. Personas are almost always caused by the goal of popularity or likability taking primacy over other goals, especially common in areas where unpopular popularity-gaining abuses are possible, such as in Super Mario Maker or the corrupt world of politics. I believe this to be a pattern that can be tracked very closely along many high-profile cultural examples, but most importantly, it was absolutely the case in Miiverse hacking. If we really wanted to stop the badmins, in what way did bombing, or honestly any of the Miiverse hacks, actually help? What about the culture? If we wanted to find a cure for the toxic culture of Miiverse, how did bombing and hacking help with that? I mentioned a lot of the reasons for wanting to overcome some of Nintendo's restrictions in the last video, but we never stopped the admins, only pretended to. The only thing Miiverse hacking allowed you to do was hide from the admins for a brief period, not come into any kind of direct confrontation. We also never cured the culture. Instead, we took all the worst aspects of it, amplified them, and brought them out in the open, then added our own brand of annoying bombing toxicity. Our words were misaligned with our behavior. We spoke about reforming Miiverse, something likable, while engaging in popularity hacks that actually cheapen the Miiverse experience and were not likable at all. Thus, just like in Super Mario Maker, attention and popularity were the goals. All the unironic motives Miiverse hackers touted were used as a ruse for the completely unrelated act of grifting attention from yabots, followbots, and hacked posts that caught people's eyes. Yet, in the case of Miiverse, there's an extra layer of complexity. As it turns out, personas can be employed for secondary motives besides simply expediting popularity. In the persona I just cited, I didn't just want to act like I was saving Miiverse. You see, it had another feature which aimed to convince myself and others that I actually had the power to destroy the admins and save Miiverse like I said. Using my intelligence and courage, I was taking justice into my own hands, finding a vigilante's revenge with my incredible skills. I wasn't just saying, I'm on your side. I want to save Miiverse. Like me, I was also saying, I have the power to save Miiverse. I can dominate, stare in awe at my power. Clearly, this was a ridiculous idea, as I've already explained, but it shows how other goals affected my actions, while still being likable enough to function as a cover for the true popularity grifting nature of my hacks. It's clear that the Miiverse hacking persona could serve another goal, that of fostering megalomaniacal feelings of grandiosity and arrogance with our platform-specific power. This goal took the back seat whenever we held this more vigilante-like persona, but while we used the justification of stopping badmins and reforming Miiverse in some contexts, in other contexts, we didn't. We often used those goals of Miiverse reform as a likable persona, but at other times, our personas actually weren't likable at all. Instead, we were unashamedly arrogant, stuck up, and belittling to others. The whole point of the persona, as described in the Super Mario Maker discussion, was to create a pretty face, completely non-narcissistic looking, that would maximize popularity when used in tandem with unlikable popularity gaining practices. Yet, when these goals of arrogance and grandiosity were at play as well, it might be that different things might occur in different situations. In the case of Mario Maker, the forces toward these other goals actually thwarted that goal of maximum popularity. I made pretentious guidelines that I didn't follow myself, and in retrospect, I did so poorly enough that most people could probably see through it. I inappropriately allowed the goal of popularity to take the back seat to those secondary narcissistic goals, ultimately resulting in a persona that looked more stuck up than anything else. The same thing happened with the unlikable, arrogant persona sometimes expressed in Miiverse hacking, but its use wasn't inappropriate or due to any lack of skill. Instead, the primacy of my likable and unlikable personas followed patterns directly related to the necessities of the situation. In the case of Miiverse hacking, all the tools necessary to achieve that main goal of attention, at least in the scope of the site, were provided right off the bat by the hacks themselves. When we started out, not yet aware of this fact, the likable vigilante was in charge. However, once we realized yaw-bombing, follow-botting, and magic post creation ensured a relatively high level of popularity, it became clear to most Miiverse hackers that we need not worry about making our persona likable. Instead, we aimed for the royal flush of narcissistic gratification. Since attention was covered, we decided to make a full set with status, arrogance, and domination. The goal of popularity was achieved, so it lessened its hold on our actions. The persona was no longer a servant of the goal of popularity, but a tool to pick up other forms of gratification along the way. As I developed in my hacking career, I went beyond simple romantic idealization of my abilities to save Miiverse, or banter against an administration I no longer had to fear. I hinted at something much stronger. A completely distorted picture that I had power over everyone, and that everyone's fates were in my hands. Theatrical displays of power, belittling and taunting others, were all part of my goals to show how their fates completely depended upon my discretion. I had those powers that no one else had, and I could do whatever I wanted with them. I could either choose to listen to the sheep or crush them under my thumb. People asked me to yah their posts or to stop yahing their posts, and I didn't have to listen to any of them. I was their god, and I did what I wanted. The word to describe this was megalomania. I no longer had to care what people thought about me, so I was granted the freedom to savor the feeling of power over them. I loved watching the people who hated me boil, and the ones who loved me wet themselves, and all my actions served to increase the intensity of both these emotions. I told people to block me, knowing full well that it would only last until the next account was made, and they'd have to do it again and again and again. I said, "Follow me, my disciples, and let us destroy Miiverse together." But I made it clear that not even my disciples were safe from being destroyed if the fancy took me. Everything was done to put myself at a higher level, and to make others feel lower so that I'd be even higher in comparison. I had the power of free popularity no matter what people thought, so I could do what I wanted. Yet, it was only a persona. As it turned out, my power wasn't infinite, and people had the ability to change my fate if they chose. After 2 weeks of constant new accounts and belittling behavior, people were getting bored with Tim. People were starting to get good at blocking new accounts, which were becoming riskier to make as a hyperban loomed. Magic posts were no longer novel, both for me and for others, and people were becoming less impressed at my greatness. As much as I wanted to make myself seem infinitely higher than others, dehumanizing the people around you isn't a very popular course of action, and it just wasn't working anymore. Popularity stopped being a given, and my persona once again had to be used pragmatically. As time went on, the arrogant, unlikable persona began to fade, and a more timid version of the old Miiverse crusader took center stage once again. Even though by this point I had clearly stated my desire for a hyperban, its reality had only just sunk in. The final days of Tim involved very slow, deliberate posting to anger the admins the smallest amount possible, with much more talk of the injustices of the administration and more inclusive, non-egotistical memes. The high was gone, and once again, the persona was used in slim hopes of maintaining popularity. The persona was an important part of Miiverse hacking, and it worked in so many different ways, but always toward the aim of narcissistic goals. In normal scenarios, the persona was used as a popularity-gaining tool, but when the unique circumstance of Miiverse hacking meant popularity was guaranteed, it could work in different ways. As soon as my ego was secure, I stopped trying to appeal to people, instead belittling them to make myself seem higher. However, as soon as my popularity and power were threatened, I reverted back to my old ways, sucking up to the people once again in hopes of retaining that popularity and power. What the ramifications of speech and action being distorted to serve ulterior motives are, I don't know. Something happens when words, actions, and truth itself become distorted to achieve certain ends. But my job today isn't to pass judgment upon this concept. Maybe that's for another day. All I can tell you now is exactly what I did. A dark future loomed for one such as myself. I was grasping for straws, milking Miiverse for everything it had to offer in hopes of retaining that unique narcissistic high from the abilities provided by Miiverse and its culture for just a little longer. Things may have gotten pretty ugly had I completely sputtered out, but luckily, Seth came to save the day. Well, that's the beauty of this whole thing, son. None of this even matters at all. Rat Movie 2, the movie. Around the time those arrogant personas began wearing off, Seth, another Miiverse hacker, began interacting with some of my posts. Seth was actually the original reason I began to consider Miiverse hacking. Through watching his posts in April and May 2017, I began to see how easy it actually was, and how anyone could do it, leading me to investigate Miiverse hacking in the first place. Becoming chummy with famous users of a given platform was something I'd done before with Super Mario Maker, Twitter, and various corners of YouTube, and it often revitalized my potential with that given platform. These cases will be discussed later. In this case, after a few interactions on Miiverse, I was invited to a Discord server owned by Seth. However, the results of this were not what I might have predicted. Strange dynamics allowed a unique brand of irony to serve as a new type of persona. One with ambitious goals, but seemed ultimately not to be up to the test. There are valuable lessons to be learned from how this irony functioned, where it was utilized, and what it caused that might be considered valuable. Narcissism isn't just a drive for popularity, but a need to be on top. When you're governed by narcissism and others are higher, that's a problem. Crippling jealousy is the name of the game, an inability to accept anyone's success other than your own, and only your own when you're confident that it's secure. Thus, instead of dealing with the fact that others are more popular or more skilled than you, it's much easier just to pretend that they don't exist, going off into a little corner of the world where you actually can be on top. Miiverse was a corner that was easy for narcissists to climb to the top of. However, though we thought we were safe to be on top of our corner, it turned out that there were other contenders. Contenders who could all be found on a single Discord server. The idea of how a Miiverse hacking community could exist in this context is ludicrous. What stopped us from tearing each other into pieces? Seth's cool server, it's pretty cool I guess, as it was called, had some conflicted dynamics. It was a group that included some 10 Miiverse hackers, which we can go easier on ourselves and describe simply as narcissists, who all existed in a single place, attempting to function as a community. Who could have come up with an idea like that expecting it to be successful? Well, Seth, I guess. As it turns out, though, it was relatively successful. It maintained a stable set of central actors who communicated regularly without anyone destroying anyone else to snuff out the competition. However, the stability of this community came not from a lack of these internal tensions. There were many tensions, some at fundamental levels which I'll lay out soon, but by the way we acted that kept these tensions in check. You see, it wasn't just that we didn't get into fights or openly call each other out. We didn't say or do anything of substance at all, positive or negative. The invention of a strange brand of ambiguous irony took center stage, so even if something negative was said, it was understood not to be substantive. In this server, a truly toxic meme culture emerged. A horrible brand of irony in which motivations and desires were obscured, personal growth was halted, and true meaning was impossible. Traditional humor comes from one side. There's almost always a specific truth that a comedian tries to express by showing some absurdity and/or obvious shared experience. When a truth is said in just the right way, it's like tension is released and a laugh is produced. There can be millions upon millions of variations of humor where this framework is used very minimally. But even if some comedy breaks free from this structure, it is how irony should function, the main focus of this discussion of humor. I'm not talking about situational irony, where something happens that is unexpected or the opposite of what you'd expect, but rather verbal irony, things like sarcasm and satire. There are two specific types of irony I'm going to talk about today, which have unique advantages that most people wouldn't consider, but someone narcissistically inclined would. Irony is one of the most unnecessarily confusing and conflated topics imaginable. So I think the best way to describe exactly what I'm talking about and what made these two forms of irony so special is through an example. Imagine you're coming home from work one day, and your wife calls you to ask if you could grab a few groceries from the store on your way. Because you have a loving, healthy relationship, you do so happily. When you come home, your wife helps you put them away, and you sincerely thank her for giving a helping hand. Congratulations! You're a normie who just did something sincerely. Now, imagine for a second that you hate your wife, and she hates you back, and you both wish the other was dead. This time, when you come home, she doesn't help you put the groceries away, and you angrily shove them in a cupboard all by yourself. You yell up the stairs, "Thanks for helping me put the groceries away, you ungrateful bitch." Voila! You have just used sarcasm, or one-layered irony. Traditional irony like this has to have a truth to function off of, even if that truth is the untruth of another idea. In this case, that your wife didn't help you put the groceries away. Irony is the expression of an opposite, which requires a framework of reality to function with. At this level, it seems obvious, but it gets less obvious when another layer of irony is added. Imagine for a second that you were dropped on your head as a child. When you come home, your wife helps you in the task of putting groceries away again. But this time, even though she actually helped you, and you know she did, you yell at her ironically, once again thanking her for putting the groceries away, bitch, because you've completely forgotten how to be sincere. You love your wife, and you want to thank her, but you're an insecure little shit, so you hide behind an inappropriately placed ironic tone so you can be distanced from your emotions. This is post-irony, sometimes related to the concept of new sincerity in institutional settings. Saying a statement of fact, exactly what you mean to be true, but in an ironic manner. Post-irony, whether used for humorous reasons or just for the simple expression of an idea, always provides distance from the meaning of your words. Even though most people, especially in the internet world, are capable of recognizing post-irony, there always remains a lingering feeling of ambiguity about a post-ironic statement's meaning, which always prevents the full potency of its ideas from taking effect. There can be hints galore about the true sincerity behind the ironic tone, but the tone remains ironic, so plausible deniability and the claim that it's just ironic is always possible when post-irony is in use. All debates to be had about the merits of post-irony are not about if post-irony creates distance from meaning, but about if or how this distance could be used for good, or if there are other advantages that make it worthwhile. But this isn't what we're talking about today. Distance from the meaning of a joke or meme is a guaranteed result of post-irony, regardless of motive, and that's all we need to know. Right now, just think about the distance post-irony creates with what we already know in mind. What type of person might benefit from putting an extra layer of irony in front of their ideas in this way? Since distance from ideas means all criticism for them will also be distance, post-irony brings very particular advantages for an insecure person of the vulnerable narcissist type. Protecting a fragile ego, avoiding conflict, and maximizing likability. But when our goals are to be distance from ideas and the criticism that comes with them, why just stop there? Why have any ideas at the core of your statements at all? They just leave weak points that meaning might leak out of, and they should be removed. Luckily, when your goals are distance from ideas and protection from criticism, they naturally are. In a group like Seth's Cool Server with narcissism at its core, post-irony only served as a transitional phase. With the goals as they were, the truth decayed, and post-irony naturally deteriorated into something else entirely. Meta-irony. Imagine someone saying, "I want to die," in an ironic tone. I don't mean as an exaggerated response to some event or as the punchline to a joke. That's the entirety of the statement. "I want to die," used as a joke, with no build-up, no context, nothing. Are they making fun of people who are suicidal, the ironic statement, or are they themselves legitimately suicidal, the post-ironic statement? Even though the post-ironic option is slightly easier to sell, neither one really makes sense, and the meaning is completely ambiguous. The statement is meta-ironic. If irony is making fun of something, with however many layers you want, either an opposite or return to sincerity, to reveal an underlying truth, then this isn't really irony at all. There is no underlying truth to be expressed, so trying to interpret it like there is gets you nowhere. In meta-irony, even though you're still saying things satirically in an ironic tone, there is no meaning at the core of your words. We're not stuck with minor confusion and plausible deniability. There's no longer even a point to be denied. Do I want to die, or do I think that wanting to die is ridiculous? The truth is, I'm not sure, so I just say it in a silly, ironic-sounding way and leave the interpretation up to others. Meta-irony is fairly common in the internet world, but it is often conflated with other things. Random humor, non-sequiturs, is similar to meta-irony in many ways, often coexisting in the same joke or meme. They both are slightly confused with no inherent resolution or tight reflection back to a main point. However, what they do is fundamentally different. Truly random humor is funny only because it doesn't make sense. It serves to surprise with something that makes no sense from context. Unlike non-sequiturs, which gain their humor from the randomness of a situation, meta-irony satirizes a position, although the reason it does it for is unclear. One is funny because of the existence of a situation itself, while the other is ironic about a situation, without an actual point of view. In this way, non-sequiturs and meta-irony can coexist in a meme when a random topic is picked apart meta-ironically, or when illogical reasons for something are given as part of the irony. But even though we can introduce a random thing out of context, then make a meta-ironic point about it, which includes random gags, we're doing two different things. One is relatively simple and innocent, while the other is perhaps the most powerful corrosive force ever devised. While true humor brings truth into a different light, allowing it to be seen and accepted by a wide range of people, meta-irony makes it so that you never have to reveal any truth, freeing yourself from all accountability. On closer examination, how meta-irony can even be defined as humor or even be considered funny at all is very questionable. There are cases where one might find meta-irony funny, where the exaggerated meaninglessness of its ambiguity becomes comical, but this usually only works from a nihilistic perspective. More often than not, when we find ourselves laughing at a meta-ironic meme, we're really laughing at a non sequitur alongside it. The comedic potential of meta-irony itself is actually quite dry. What meta-irony really is a tool. Without a point to our humor, the responsibilities such points bring are waived. All criticism can be avoided, which is very valuable. But even more advantages open up when it's taken a bit further. Seeing its value, that's exactly what we did in Seth's cool server. What unfolded there is what I like to describe as open verse meta-irony. We didn't just tell meta-ironic jokes, we broke free from the very construct of joke, so that basically everything we said was under a meta-ironic framework. In other words, except for a select few topics, everything became ambiguous, and everything was said in a sardonic, mocking tone. This achieved two goals. On one hand, meta-irony's constant mocking tone desensitized us from real criticism and made it impossible to identify. When literally everything is said ironically, the searing powers of true irony become incomprehensible. The truth of all issues becomes so muddled by the widespread usage of meta-irony that it becomes impossible to tell what's serious and what isn't. There just isn't any truth at all. I guess you could say that the situational irony of this story about irony is that by becoming so captured by meta-ironic memes, it was I who became tone-deaf to humor, not the normies. But that's really the whole point. When an ambiguous precedent is set, there's no way to identify the meaning of others, and you are protected. On the other hand, what emerged was a pathologically agreeable hyper-persona. We moved beyond identifying the words and beliefs that made the maximum amount of people like us, and instead avoided belief entirely. This allowed us to avoid criticism and allowed others to project their own ideas onto us. The use of sardonic irony may seem to thwart these goals. However, the negative tone of meta-irony, while seeming disagreeable on the outside, is completely transformed by the ambiguity of meaning. Instead of actually polarizing one side of an issue, the ambiguity means that meta-irony still allows anyone to project any belief onto you. When this is mixed with the desensitization of real criticism, you're left with an unstoppable combination. This is how things devolved in Seth's cool server, and I believe the story is very similar with anyone who uses meta-irony. Insecurity, the desire to avoid conflict and disagreement, is the necessary motive for anyone using ambiguous forms of irony. In psychology, distinctions are often made between grandiose and vulnerable narcissism. However, both vulnerable, agreeable insecurity and grandiose, disagreeable arrogance are members of the narcissist's toolbox. It's all on a spectrum, dependent on how the different tools are used. What the story of the persona and hyperpersona tells us is that most of the time, Miiverse hackers were occupied with defending their egos in a vulnerably narcissistic manner. It was only when the situation was just right, a situation provided by Miiverse.nintendo.net, that the tools of grandiosity finally came out. In the end, we usually liked to be protected, and meta-irony provided protection. Now, confusion about truth and mirroring other beliefs are common behaviors in children. But the situation is new, and it's possible that different incentives exist to encourage these and many other narcissistic behaviors well beyond childhood and adolescence. Meta-irony didn't used to exist. It's only been a concept for around 30 years, and has only really held strong influence over normal people for around 15. The extent to which meta-irony was enabled by cultural versus technological factors can be debated, but that's a topic for another time. The point is that it's new, and that it's here to stay unless new changes occur. It appears that meta-irony is caused solely by the desires to avoid criticism and attempt to reflect what others like. And if I had to guess, its growth shows that these desires are also probably growing. But I don't know the answers for sure. None of this is gospel that can be extrapolated to every case. Just what I know happened in my own. There's another aspect to this story, which I unfortunately don't have the knowledge or time to explain in full, but is necessary to finish the story of how irony functioned. In almost every case I've seen, open-verse meta-irony reverted back to unironic belief. There were various ways this could go, sometimes to unironic nihilism, sometimes to extremism, sometimes just to whatever belief was easiest and most popular to accept when the time came to relinquish the narcissistic ambiguity. But the constant fact was that the narcissistic ambiguity was always relinquished. It seems that there's a force that always makes it easier to choose an ideological home. Whether this is because of the actual impracticality of using constant ambiguity to gain popularity, or because of something else entirely, I don't know. All I know is that the ambiguity of meta-irony could vary, and that it constantly waned over time. Once again, the details can be filled in on a later day. Regardless, it was the ambiguity expressed in open-verse meta-irony that was the sole force that kept Seth's cool server running. It was such a fundamental aspect of communication there and elsewhere among the minor Miiverse hackers that I can safely say that without it, there would have been no Miiverse hacking community. If it weren't for irony's ability to hide most motives, jealousy, the main unironic relationship we shared, would have otherwise caused us to tear each other to bits. To a lesser extent, I think this can be extrapolated to PF2M server and all the dealings that occurred on Google+, but I was less familiar with them. Although meta-irony existed there, it appears to have played a smaller role. This was probably because the most active Miiverse hackers, PF2M, Arion, and Talon, could only really be jealous of each other, because all three of them could safely consider themselves to be above the majority of less devoted hackers that congregated in Seth's cool server. But even in Seth's cool server, the irony didn't hold 100% of the time. In fact, things were often still very tense and conflicted. Heroes must see to their own fame. No one else will. Gorbadal, Julian. There were many meta-ironic beefs between members of Seth's cool server over the months, but as you can probably guess by the ambiguous nature of open-verse meta-irony, almost none of them ever amounted to anything. Even if someone left the server or was kicked, they were added back 9 minutes later and everything was forgotten. But even though most things were shielded with irony, that doesn't mean that there weren't things we took seriously. There are many examples of things the community had a strong unironic response to. But today we'll focus on one concept that provoked a strong unironic response. The script kiddie. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it can be found that this and all the things that provoked such an unironic response followed a pattern that had to do with our basic motives. A script kiddie, in most cases, is a person, usually a kiddie, who hacks websites, video games, or devices using scripts readily available on the internet, created by others to be used for that particular purpose. Sound familiar yet? Script kiddies usually don't contribute code to the hacks they find while surfing the web, and sometimes don't understand code at all. Usually they pretend to know more than they actually do, trying to trick people into thinking they're some smart, powerful hacker. A script kiddie is scum. A subhuman creature who seeps the life out of others' work for their own personal gain. Or at least, this was the opinion of Seth and many other Miiverse hackers on the server in June and July of 2017. But before we get into the strange way things worked there, let's make one thing crystal clear. All Miiverse hackers, except maybe PF2M and Arion, were script kiddies. The very action of Miiverse hacking was literally the dictionary definition of script kiddism. Sorry, Seth. I'm not discounting any Miiverse hacker's knowledge of code learned before hacking, while hacking, or after hacking. Some of you Linux bros actually learned your stuff. But in the very action of Miiverse hacking, stealing other people's scripts in order to look smart on the internet, we became script kiddies, and by no means earned the arrogance expressed in our personas. Just embrace the label. It's real, and it's much healthier this way. Although some things may have changed after I left, embrace was unfortunately not something that ever happened during my time on the server. In this server, owned by and named after someone who took scripts that were readily available on the internet to hack a website using an arrogant persona that was filled to the brim with people who did the same, no one was hated more than a script kiddie. Wherever real, unironic frustration was to be expressed, the most common insult would be script kiddie. Someone suspected of script kiddism would be forced to redeem themselves or be shunned. Script kiddies were despised, and no one wanted to be one. Yet everyone was. The label cut deep, and the aversion and hatred for it was completely unironic. There was an obvious blind spot in the Miiverse hacking community, and there's a simple explanation for it. The seed for this hatred came straight from the core of Miiverse hacking culture. PF2M and Arion Cordy, who first released the hacking scripts, encouraging script kiddies, used the fact that they weren't script kiddies as a point of superiority. Being in the good graces of these two users had certain advantages, and since they resented script kiddies, it was necessary to mirror their opinions and try to appear as non-script kiddish as possible to avoid criticism. Obviously, we couldn't be the derogatory kiddie if we were literally the greatest pwners of the Miiverse kiddies alive, so once the seed was planted by the higher-ups, avoiding the appearance of script kiddism came in large part from necessity. In pursuit of this goal, there was some good old-fashioned psychological projection at work as well. In trying to avoid being a script kiddie, many tools were used, including the exaggerated hatred of anyone who might be found to fall under the category. And since, if it were possible to convince people that we weren't script kiddies and others were, there was the positive advantage of exercising superiority over others, it's really no surprise why such a hatred should emerge and intensify over time. In the end, there were motives from a grandiose and vulnerable perspective for both avoiding the appearance of script kiddism and unironically hating those who might be identified as one. Now, when I say that this hatred for script kiddies was unironic, I mean that, unlike most beliefs, opinions, or actions, the concept had a real effect on how we felt, and there was truth at the core of our statements about it. But the story was similar with almost anything that directly affected our egos in some way, either by pandering to or attacking our narcissism. The label of script kiddie did both. Ambiguity was impossible wherever it might make us go against our basic motives. But this doesn't mean irony was completely out of the equation. It almost never was. We were not able to be ambiguous about our positions on these topics. We were always on the side most advantageous to our egos, but we were still able to use irony to dampen some of those feelings and avoid conflict. In other words, remembering the differences between meta-irony and post-irony from the last part, there was truth at the core of our words, but we retained our post-ironic tools of fostering ambiguity of interpretation. Whenever something had to do with our egos, meta-irony tended to revert back to some kind of post-irony or post-post-irony. Arrogance at one's newly discovered powers is an essential component of script kiddism, expressed freely on Miiverse, but hidden among other Miiverse hackers. Even though our actual arrogant feelings were often legitimate, assumption of irony in all arrogant script kiddie smartness was necessary to limit potential attacks. When around other Miiverse hackers, it was necessary to either curb your arrogance or mask it with irony, lest someone be rubbed the wrong way. Whenever someone failed to hide their arrogance with multi-interpretational irony, the opportunity to teach them a lesson would be taken, often resulting in a script kiddie accusation which stroked the ego of the accuser. This happened more often than you might think, but usually the wounds wouldn't cut deep, so long as the lesson was learned and irony was returned to. But sometimes the lesson wasn't learned. The only people to ever be permanently shunned from Seth's school server, Talon and Moss 420, didn't act worse than anyone else, they just never masked their arrogance with irony. They couldn't learn their lesson, and that was unforgivable. I mentioned earlier some of the tools we use to avoid being stamped with a script kiddie label. However, it might surprise you to learn that one of those tools was to actually learn. Many of the Miiverse clones and other projects worked on by Eric D., Seth et al. Existed only because of a strong desire not to be a script kiddie. Everyone who wasn't Arion or PF2M caught flack for not contributing to Miiverse hacking. But in this case, our egos actually led us towards positive change. This was partially why I recreated that Yabom while banned script that Seth refused to give to me, mentioned in part 2. I was a script kiddie who had not achieved anything, and since Seth had begun to practice code with Cedar, when I asked for the Yabom while banned script, he realized he was on a higher plane of existence, told me I was a script kiddie, even though he didn't make the script either, and said I should fuck off. But in doing so, he encouraged me to figure out the script on my own, and I did, which means this is a really happy motivational story about how Miiverse encouraged people to go out and do things, right? Unfortunately, Narcissism was still king. After I figured out the script and made it public with a YouTube video, Seth and Eric D. got mad at me for not keeping what they had kept secret from me a secret from others, and dislike bombed it with 13 accounts. Although it had important motivational powers, our hatred of script kiddies ultimately served narcissistic ends. We never wanted script kiddies to actually go out and learn things, damn it. We just wanted them to kneel before us in our honor. As we can see in this case of the script kiddie, all ambiguity quickly faded whenever our egos were on the line. While it's easy to be ambiguous about Nazis and murder and rape, it's not so easy to take a wishy-washy stance on your own superiority. Since there were narcissistic advantages to being less script kiddish than others, and disadvantages to being accused of script kiddism, the topic was one to be taken seriously. And whenever someone failed to mask their arrogance with irony, it was. Irony in these cases was only occasionally used as a tool to avoid criticism. The actual lines in the sand as regards belief remained strikingly clear. But what does it mean that this drive for respect and power was actually strong enough to encourage us to do things? Well, after all that talk about unjustified arrogance and narcissism, it's a bit complicated, but here goes nothing. The boy cried out, "Smart! Smart!" still louder than before. But this time the villagers, who had been fooled twice before, thought the boy was again lying, and nobody came. Aesop, the boy who cried wolf. Did you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in the cage? Pink Floyd, wish you were here. Nearly every Miiverse hacker was young. Very young. If I had to guess, I'd say that all were high schoolers at the oldest when they began hacking. A large fraction were likely middle schoolers. We're talking people 15, 14, 13, and in my case, 12 years old. The kiddie aspect was quite accurate in this sense, but most of us had skills that many adults didn't possess, and a strong narcissistic drive for success that, as we have seen, could make us unironically improve in some directions. Thus, I believe that we had partially realistic narcissistic motives. In other words, I think we were actually superior in many ways which were only exemplified when we weren't misled by our narcissism. Unfortunately, this only happened occasionally. as we'll soon see, there were many negative consequences to our motives, which in most ways squandered the actual skill and intelligence Miiverse hackers may have possessed. But hold on, let's take a step back here. What exactly am I selling? Well, to start, partially realistic does not mean at all that our arrogance was justified, or that we possessed an accurate depiction of ourselves in our minds. The persona was grandiose and exaggerated, but it had a foundation in real skills and experiences that separated us from others our age. I believe we had, and still have, the ability to be great and superior at many things. The desire for greatness wasn't just limited to persona, but was able to unironically manifest itself in our actions, to the point where many of us actually did become superior in many dimensions. Things like superiority and skill are subjective and hard to quantify, so I won't attempt to do so. Instead, I'll leave my description of partially realistic narcissistic motives like this. At the bottom of our personas and our desire for greatness, there lay a kernel of truth. It's possible that this is actually a self-evident fact for all types of arrogance, but I just don't feel comfortable making a stronger statement. At least, not today. All I can recall are my subjective experiences in the past. When I look back and remember the interactions I had with the other hackers on Discord, I remember a profound intelligence and ability for their age, but a feeling of hopelessness. Held back because of their age, circumstances, or social ability, they were too little to make any positive change. We had no way to prove our skills, and were often on the bottom rung of the social ladder even with people our own ages. With no way to prove their abilities, people feel belittled and bitter. How could we receive recognition for our perceived skills? Well, despite the low amount of skill and effort inherent in the method, to many of us, it seemed Miiverse hacking provided us that opportunity. But the irony of this situation is that due to the immature, arrogant nature of the persona, we failed stupendously in achieving our goals, proving a childishness that otherwise may have gone unnoticed. Arrogance caused by partially realistic narcissistic motives grabs onto a positive truth about one's character, something legitimately laudable, then exaggerates it grossly so as to actually cheapen that original truth. So if I were, for the sake of example, a user of a social media platform where many children existed, it's possible I might be smarter than most of those children. Hurrah for me. But when narcissism attempts to extrapolate this beyond what can clearly be seen, perhaps first to the administration of the site, then to the site's base as a whole, and then maybe to people beyond the confines of the site itself, the truth that we started out with becomes a lot less meaningful. Whenever you start spewing out words and emotions without any real basis, it'll be a lot harder to use those words and express those emotions with a real basis later. I believe this to be a basic axiom, and it has something to do with the story of the boy who cried wolf, which most of you should know. In this case, though, it's the boy who cried smart. After a while, no one believes you, not even yourself. There was legitimate skill and drive in the Miiverse hackers. Unfortunately, the persona, in the ways I have recalled countless times already, grossly exaggerated this. And along with the cheapening of authentic pride and success came a lower desire to gain it in the future. Thus, opportunity was squandered, and it was about to be squandered even more, but for a different reason. As I mentioned in part 7, the name of the game wasn't just about being popular or having attention, but of minimizing your world to avoid jealousy and protect your ego. It was all relative, a matter of protecting a flattering perception. And even though being a part of something greater would be immensely more meaningful and valuable than being on top of something like Super Mario Maker or Miiverse, it didn't matter. If I was on the top in one place, I could forget all other places until I was finally shaken with the loss of relative status in that place. Although I always had some idea of a larger, more objective place which best Mario Maker and best Miiverse user would certainly not be on top of, I tried to push these ideas away, at least for a short period of time, to be discussed later. Because of the small scope feelings associated with it, I chose to have the lead role in a cage instead of a small but meaningful role in something important. This is Miiverse hacking at its core, perhaps showing better than anything else why we found Miiverse so appealing. The truth was that when the cage that was Miiverse was so ripe for the taking, all the more real, valuable, and grandiose dreams disappeared. Miiverse offered a small, easily accessible version of everything I could have ever dreamed of. And since it felt the same as the real deal, it was good enough for me. There were others better than me, the existence of whom drove me crazy, but by pretending they didn't exist, I found an easy way to be on top. My dreams of recognition, power, and fame were too hard, but by shrinking the world to the size of Miiverse, I could feel like I had them. I wanted to feel famous and powerful, and Miiverse was offering the feelings up cheap. Where those feelings were found didn't matter. Legitimate ambition and skill stagnated because of jealousy and the temptation to narrow one's horizons for an easy way to reach a relative top. Narcissism has the potential to create great things. Narcissistic motives have fueled some of the greatest artistic, literary, and scientific achievements. Some are fueled by the pure merits of an art form, but many others would never have decided to put their ideas into that art form if it weren't for the narcissistic potential of popularity and recognition inherent there. I believe Miiverse hackers were skilled. We had potential. But when narcissism took full control, the consequences became far greater than the advantages. Arrogance lowers your potential to receive real praise, and thus motivate you to do things. And jealousy makes it impossible to function in a larger sphere. At least the way our motives were mixed, both the grandiosity of arrogance and the vulnerability of jealousy squandered our potential. And unfortunately, I think these aspects led most Miiverse hackers towards some pretty unforgiving places. Much of the Miiverse clone drama after I left can be easily explained as the actions of narcissists exaggerating their own worth in ever more distant cages, ultimately leading to catastrophic results. But I wasn't there, and I probably shouldn't generalize like that. Where was I? Well, it's a little harder to generalize when it's your own life, so I won't. I guess it's time to talk some more about myself again. And here I am, the same, in a different establishment once more. I can't change what's happened to me in my life, or make what's not occurred take place. But I can't say I like it, or accept it, or believe it's for the best. I don't, and never shall. Not even if I'm damned for it. Margaret Lawrence, the Stone Angel. It wasn't just with Miiverse hacking or Super Mario Maker where I was influenced by narcissism, but with nearly every one of my personal endeavors in at least the last 5 years. I stopped playing Super Mario Maker in September 2016, annoyed by both its creative restrictions and its narrow horizons for amassing attention. I mostly cited the former, but was mostly motivated by the latter. I started hacking Miiverse in May 2017, and only 2 weeks later, in June, I was already hyperbanned. These cages were just short periods of my life, and the act of leaving Super Mario Maker came with the start of the dissolution of that cage way of thinking. New questions entered my head. Could I do better than Mario Maker? Later, the question became, could I do better than Miiverse? This makes my story different from one of a narcissist who stuffed himself into a cage. Instead, I tried out cages of all different shapes and sizes, eventually disliking the idea of a cage itself. But rather than changing myself to accommodate new circumstances or information, I assimilated everything I did into my narcissistic framework, adding new tools to my repertoire and ignoring everything that might damage my ego. I went through various shifts in my life, trying different things to gain different amounts of popularity in different places. Yet somehow, that leading drive of narcissism was never affected. I think it's time for that to change. To see what I mean, I want to go back in time, to May 2016, the month of my first Miiverse ban. I was banned for sharing personal information when I included a fictitious 555 number in a joke mimicking a corporate disclaimer. I came to realize the issues with Miiverse and incorporated this realization into an attempt at a more hardened, mature persona. Obviously, the idea that a 555 number constituted personal information was BS, and I made that fact clear with several calls to Nintendo customer service. In truth, though, the post was much more in a gray area than I made it out to be. So in later descriptions of the event, I often changed or simplified certain details of the post to make it seem like more of an injustice than it actually was. The post itself was a pretend shocking statement, followed by the disclaimer in question directed at the admins themselves, telling them not to ban me, which included the 555 number in question in case they had any questions or comments. While it didn't share personal information and didn't explicitly break any Miiverse rules, it wasn't so cut and dry as it may have been so easy to say. Regardless, seeing the issues with Miiverse, issues with other systems became clearer to me as well. I began to take myself more seriously as I slowly came to realize that there was a place on Miiverse for criticisms of different parts of the Miiverse and Super Mario Maker systems, that I was smarter than the admins, and that other people believed it. It was shortly after this realization that I posted the criticisms of play exchanges and Mario Maker marathons mentioned in Part 6. In June 2016, I joined a group of popular Super Mario Maker players on Twitter. I could write a whole nother 80-minute video about the dynamics that occurred here, but all I'm going to mention now is what didn't occur. It was a complete paradigm shift for me in many ways, but it never adjusted my overall goals. The people there opened my mind to new ideas about politics, life, and culture which I had never before seen. I learned things, of course, but these things didn't change what I truly desired. With goals unchanged, a main takeaway was that it was easier to get to know popular people and use their influence to aid myself than it was to grind all the way to popularity on my own. I still wanted to hit popularity, this time with the added skill of getting to know more famous and powerful people. I wanted to use the ideas from this community and the people who introduced them to me as a means to achieve my ends. Whenever something significant happened, I always found a way to employ the experience and knowledge for my advantage. My experiences made me aware of certain things, slightly changing the ways I tried to achieve my goals, but never, ever changing the goals themselves. Discovering a new platform or method could never change my goals. It could only add more tools to their repertoire. Thus, I took these methods learned from Miiverse and the Super Mario Maker community to larger platforms. I noticed the simplicity and popularity of parody accounts on Twitter, so I created a Reggie Fils-Aimé Twitter parody account in 2016, long before he actually joined Twitter, and amassed some 300 followers through the drivel I posted, in addition to the utilization of certain inauthentic follower-gaining websites. I plan to use my parody Reggie Twitter account as a stepping stone to promote a Leafy is Here style toxic commentary channel I plan to start, and hopefully get the chance to achieve some real fame. As soon as I had gained 500 Twitter followers or so, the goal was to begin posting 1 or 2 YouTube videos a day, sharing each on my Twitter account, hopefully enough to make a noticeable splash in the sea of the internet. In the meantime, I created several videos in advance, nihilistically picking apart controversial topics, and strategically criticizing channels that were small enough to notice me, yet large enough to bring me attention should they write a response. I want to note here that although it has a strong opportunity to be mechanized for attention-gaining purposes, I'm not criticizing the commentary genre itself. I retain respect for the commentary channels of YouTube's recent history that broke free from politeness and political correctness to make criticisms that often needed to be made. But in my case, it served the very specific purpose of being easy to create and gain popularity with. Every action I mention here was explicitly planned out in my head. Yet, in the end, I never went through with it. I actually ended up releasing a few YouTube videos and sharing them on that account, but I stopped short. This wasn't a rare occurrence. In fact, it's a pattern that I followed several times throughout my life whenever I tried attacking something bigger than Miiverse or Super Mario Maker. Consider a plan for gaining popularity, give up, then wait for several months or even years before inevitably coming back again. In the case of Reggie after Super Mario Maker, and then the cases of all my other endeavors after my hyperban, I was experimenting moving beyond my corner, looking for a lead role in something greater than a cage. But there was a very simple problem. Miiverse and Super Mario Maker spoiled me. Because attention was so easily gained there, the bar was set so low that impatience with doing anything else was guaranteed. With my experience in the easiest places to gain attention, I was disappointed at every end when my newer efforts failed. In other words, I became entitled. And because my motives mainly came not from interest or enjoyment, there was very little reason to continue work on anything after it had failed to grift popularity. I'm not allowed to get 1,000 instant YouTube likes with a run of a script? What kind of rigged BS is this? Gotta quit that one. Designing a game has hundreds of complex parts that are really hard to do on my own, even though I need to do it on my own to get all the credit? Phew, good thing I dodged that bullet before it was too late. And so it was with everything else. I made several other YouTube channels with different topics. Another commentary channel with the added advantage of skits in spring 2017, a channel devoted to debunking different conspiracy claims I had found in spring 2018, and a channel that was supposed to analyze different aspects of gaming in spring 2019. But the attention wasn't enough, so I stopped. I worked on ideas for a narrative-driven video game concept. I made the sprites, wrote the basic code, and even created a couple musical pieces. But the attention wasn't enough, so I stopped. I fished around different Discord communities, which I knew had famous or powerful people in them, but in every case, the attention wasn't enough, so I stopped. Miiverse and Super Mario Maker were, at least for me, only the first out of several different avenues of attention I sought. The medium changed constantly, but the motive was always the same. I think this shows, more than anything else, how the core motives for Miiverse hacking were just that simple. Beyond all the background information, the context of the platform, our personal lives and our histories, the one common motive was narcissism. At the core of Miiverse's flawed design, in all its problems with post-interaction, moderation in children, there lay an invitation for narcissism. In the way the situation was taken advantage of, where Miiverse hacking provided the chance to give powers no one else possessed, there lay narcissism. In the Miiverse hacking persona, and all personas I inhabited, which varied much in whether they legitimately sought to maximize popularity or wanted to make us seem powerful and commanding, there lay narcissism. In the extreme meta-irony and contradictory community actions, there lay a veil for narcissism. Behind this video series I write right now, which I've spent incredible numbers of hours working on to detail the complexity of this situation in my life, there lies narcissism. Yes, I do get the irony of writing a 2-hour video about myself and narcissism in my life. That is the simple motive behind everything I have laid out in this series. That is the one single factor in common to everything I have done. And despite all the changes in the environment, that constant has never changed. I don't think it was always like this. Childhood, at least, was a period where I possessed a legitimate creative drive. But something happened that has not changed back. And I can't give a full explanation for it. At least, not yet. But the problem in recent years has been even greater. In addition to that entitlement that prevented me from achieving any narcissistic goals beyond a very low threshold of difficulty, another force has come to light, actually actively thwarting these narcissistic goals. New thoughts emerged. Maybe you shouldn't be seeking popularity. Maybe you should just avoid YouTube entirely. Maybe you should just avoid social media entirely. Maybe it would be best not to release this content or buy this game because it might light a fire inside of you that you can't control. You can call it a moral force if you want, but I think it's probably just a vulnerably narcissistic tool to protect my ego. Maybe to be discussed at another time. And it doesn't really matter what it is. It's stupid and incompetent. It has never incited positive action, only prevented potential negative action. It hasn't brought with it a drive to do things for reasons other than popularity, just a drive to thwart all things done for popularity, which, if you've been listening, is basically all things. It has never been stronger than the narcissistic drives, just strong enough to even things out to perfect stagnation when paired with that feeling of entitlement. Stagnation. Stagnation has been the result of all my experiences, actions, and drives in the years since Miiverse. Not moving forward, not moving backward, just sitting. And I'm done doing this now. I'm done with all of it. I'm done with Miiverse, and I'm done with Super Mario Maker. I'm done with the persona, and I'm done with the post-ironic shield. I'm done with the narcissism, and I'm done with the fake moralization that fights against it. Could Miiverse and my upbringing on social media have something to do with my problems? And could preventative measures be taken to stop people from developing them in the future? Probably. Could there be ways to use meta-irony and post-irony effectively? Or, if not, are there ways to make hiding your truth a less desirable position? Maybe. Could personas be useful sometimes, and narcissistic motives be valuable? Perhaps. But that's not what this is about. These are all things to be sorted out some other day. And maybe I'll be lucky enough to take a stab at them myself. But what this video is closure. It is me revealing and slamming the door in the face of my old way of life and my entire history. It's showing my history on Miiverse, documenting that history so that it's not forgotten and credit is given, then moving past it once and for all. That is the scope of this video and where it ends. Miiverse happened. It was a wild, fun, crazy, terrible website, and I and many others took advantage of it. We were controlled by partially realistic narcissistic motives and created a varied persona with our circumstances. We got banned, made communities, and dealt with the consequences of all these things in various ways. But right now, I'm done. It's time to turn the table one way or another and learn from my mistakes if I make them. All I know is that it's time to move on. Stagnation is not the answer, and whether my future is hopelessly narcissistic or more principled, one thing's for sure: I'm going to have a future. Thank you for watching or listening, if you did indeed watch or listen to this all the way through. I hope you found something in all of this to apply to your own life, or that maybe one of the many aspects of this story intrigued you in some way and has encouraged you to learn more about something. If you found some point objectionable, that's fine. You're free to disagree and to argue, and maybe at some point I'll take a different stance. But at this point, right now, I'm done. I've gone on for over 2 hours across 2 videos and for over 5 years throughout my life. I hope you're happy. Goodbye.